all these companies, they use this word empowerment. I actually
Yep.
don't like that word because it's like, why do we have to empower? You're taking all the power away.
Yeah.
Stop taking the power away. Just let them do their work. Get out of the way, right?
Yeah.
And you know, one of the things that I just see many companies do as they scale and they grow is they try to control all of that growth chaos with process, with,
Yep.
you know, rules, right? And, what happens is these are all well-intended good things, but what happens is all of this stuff just slows everybody down.
Yep. This is Inspiring Women, and I'm Lori McGraw. And today I am speaking with Jessica Neal on Inspiring Women. Jessica, I will have the opportunity to be on your TruthWorks podcast. That was a whole lot of fun. Just for all of the Inspiring Women listeners, Jessica Neal is a global industry leader. She knows and thinks a lot about the state of work and how to change the state of work. She thinks about employees. She thinks about what's changing. She has a lot of opinions about things that work, and she knows a lot of things that don't. She was the CHRO, Chief Health Human Resources Officer at Netflix during that enormous growth to the powerhouse that Netflix is today. She was a leadership advisor in terms of that strategy. She is a venture partner and many other things. And Jessica, thank you for being on
Ah,
Inspiring
thank
Women.
you. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. And thank you for coming on my podcast. And now I'm on your podcast. It's like, I'll do your
This is
pod,
like
you
how
do
the
my pod.
podcast
Yeah.
stuff
Yeah.
works, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Jessica, you are a global industry leader. You're a thought leader in terms of the way of work and how to create cultures that drive strategy, that drive business growth. You bring that to your work in venture. You bring that work into investing to, what you advise on out there. But before we go into all of that, why don't we just start with a bit of the bio sketch, sort of your background. How did you get there? How did you even get interested in this sort of like human capital part of the work environment?
Oh gosh. Do I go all the way back? I mean, look, I was a girl who grew up in a small town in Kentucky, and I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be a painter. So I was very good at painting. I convinced my father to let me go to art school in New York for college. He was really not so excited about it. Wanted
Do
me
you have to
wanted me
pay
to
for that?
yeah, right, do I have to pay for it? And he was like, just stay in Kentucky and like go to business school because like what are you going to do with like an art degree? He was kind of right, But anywho, I go to college in New York and I get my degree in fine art and painting, and then move out to San Francisco and wanted to prove to my father that I could make a business doing art. So I called every art gallery in San Francisco when I moved there and begged them to hire me. And one of them did. And long story short, the manager of the gallery got fired. And so I had to sell, I got promoted. I don't know how I got promoted. I guess because I was like the only one there. I went from like changing the lights.
Promotion, last
Yeah.
person standing.
Yeah. I went from changing the lights because lights are very important in our gallery and hanging the artwork to managing the gallery
Yep.
and selling the artwork. And this artwork was like, it was like more rare maps, antique prints. So it wasn't like, abstract art, like the typical art gallery you might think of. And anyways, we had 5 galleries across the US, and I ended up becoming the top salesperson. And I was the youngest, probably like 20 years, because these other people had studied this type of art, kind of like the Antiques Roadshow, if you've ever seen that.
Yep.
And the guy who owned the gallery was not the best. And the director of the art gallery was leaving. And I was like, well, I can't stay here with this crazy person, right? Who owns the gallery by myself. I have to leave. And so I started looking for jobs. And because I guess I was good at sales because I was like the top salesperson, I started to look for entry level sales jobs and I fell into recruiting.
Hmm.
And so it was a recruiting job.
That is
They
a
ended,
sales job.
yeah, and they ended up hiring me. I ended up being uniquely good at it. I'm sure there's some reason in my, brain
You
or
know the reasons.
chemistry.
I know you know the reasons. You know about talent. You understand how skills
I do.
match
I,
success in jobs. This is
yeah,
you're an expert in this, Jessica.
I know. I feel like, I don't know. I feel like God gave me like a unique ability to be a bit of a human lie detector,
Mhm.
right? So I just knew the difference between good and great. And I think a lot of folks don't.
Yep.
And I could kind of sniff out the not so great pretty easily. Um, so that's kind of how I got into HR. I did headhunting for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years. And then Netflix was my client. And they asked me to come in and run recruiting. And I said no a bunch of times. But because I was like, I'm a business person. Like
Yep.
I'm not an internal recruiter. That's not what I do. And the challenge at the time was that they could not hire the technical talent to make the transition from DVD by mail to streaming.
Yep.
And so, if for those listeners on the
For
horn that
those in the
remember,
Wayback Machine.
yeah, that remember the DVDs, they were a thing, and we shipped them. But yeah, they were this amazing company, and they were by far my favorite client because they just got it.
Yep.
They got the talent was the most important thing that they could do. They didn't worry about the small stuff. They didn't lose people over process. They didn't lose people over a couple $1,000s. They were like, we want the best. We'll do whatever it takes to get the best. And I knew what the best was, and I knew how to do it. And so I came in and took the leap and helped them make that transition. And I joined in 2006 when we were 250 salaried employees. I left when we were over 10,000 and, countries all around the world.
Yeah.
And we went from being DVD by mail to streaming to global and then to being the largest entertainment company in the world. And so
Yeah.
now, we're producing content not just in the US, but in the Middle East. We're producing content in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
Wherever.
Jessica,
Um,
let's just like pause for a second because I think it's important to um we all know Netflix. And we all know Netflix today because we all have Netflix. It is a primary source of where we get information, news, entertainment, all of the things. But in 2006, when it was DVDs, when it was you got things in the mailbox, you returned things, you had, self-addressed stamped envelopes.
yeah.
Netflix was one of a number of entertainment organizations in that space, and it was very unclear that
Yes.
Netflix would survive. It was
Yes.
very unclear. It was Blockbuster Video was
Yes,
the
it was.
seeming like, large organization that seemed like they had the juggernaut on this part of entertainment. Then Netflix went all in on streaming. Then Netflix went in and made a number of additional enormous strategic moves. And Netflix is not just a global entertainment industry, it is the largest by a lot. By a lot. There's sort of like there's Netflix, and then there's like, 85 rungs on the ladder, and then there's the next companies like Disney and
Yeah.
others in these services.
Yeah.
So with talent being the primary thing that Netflix was focused on at that time, can you talk about, how that is either similar or different than other companies, that are, on a growth trajectory or trying to like hash it out in a very competitive environment?
Yeah, no, I think what helped us a lot is that Reed, who was the CEO and he's now the
Who's
president,
a
and
friend of yours?
he is, well, I worked with him for a lot of my life. So yes, he's a friend. But he was the founder CEO and now he's the president. And he had had two other companies before Netflix, and they were successful. And we probably never had to work another day in his life. Sold them
Mm.
for a lot of money. But then when he started Netflix, he was like, okay, I'm going to focus on the things that I didn't focus on, and I'm going to build a great company. I'm not just going to build a good company. I'm going to build like a great company, and a great company that I want to work at, right?
Yep.
And so he thought about these first principle things that kind of helped set up the way that we worked, right? Which was
Yep.
our culture.
Yep.
And so one was he wanted the best, right? And he was like, I would rather hire one great person than three average people. And I'd
Yep.
rather pay that one great person the salary of all three average people, because I know if I hire the one great person, I'm going to get 10x on that, investment, right? That
Yep.
ROI is going to be through the roof. If I hire the three average people, I'm going to get no ROI,
Yep.
right? It's going to be flat, right?
Yep.
Because average only does average,
Yep.
right? And so that was sort of a first principled thing. And then it sort of led to, okay, well, if I want the best, I have to pay the best.
Yep.
Even though they were a startup, they didn't have a lot
Yep.
of money, but it was a choice, at the time that he made. And so if I'm going to hire the best, I'm going to pay the best. Then I have to find out a way of working that allows them to do their best work. And
Yep.
so that's sort of where freedom and responsibility kind of came about, which was the foundation of our culture. And freedom and responsibility was like, okay, if I'm going to pay you top of market, and I assume you're top of market, you have all this freedom
Yep.
to make decisions and do great work, but you also have all of this responsibility at the same
Yep.
time. So they go hand in hand. And what was beautiful about the environment was that when people came in, they were surrounded by these people who were so incredible, so smart, so great at their craft that they learned and that they were challenged. And then they worked in an environment where the environment trusted them
Yep.
and allowed them to do their best work. And all these companies, they use this word empowerment. I actually
Yep.
don't like that word, because it's like, why do we have to empower? You're taking all the power away.
Yep.
Stop taking the power away. Just let them do their work. Get out of the way, right?
Yep.
And you know, um, one of the things that I just see many companies do as they scale and they grow is they try to control all of that growth chaos with process, with,
Yep.
you know, rules, right? And, what happens is these are all well-intended good things, but what happens is all of this stuff just slows everybody down. It's
Yep.
just bureaucracy. I mean, I was talking to a company. I'm not going to name the company's name because you know, but it's a big, well-known company. Just the other day, it took 60 emails to approve one thing.
Mm-hmm.
60.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
I'm like, are you
There's
that's
and
just
there's it's easy to do. So like it sounds insane, but it's so easy to fall into those things. I was
yeah.
just in, a meeting with our CEO at the company that I'm at, and I'm like, I'm working on this, I'm working on this. And his comment, which I really appreciated, was like, Lori, what I hear you saying is a lot of meetings. A lot of meetings. What we need the work done. We
Right.
need the results achieved.
Right.
Let's talk about that. That's far more interesting than the
Yeah.
putting the do in place.
Yes.
So,
Speaking of meetings, there's this guy that will be on the Truth Works podcast. I think in the next week or two, it'll be out. But he's brilliant at how to like reform meetings and how to cut them all down.
like just cancel them. Just cancel
Well,
them.
yeah, yeah,
There's that.
and he's like, meetings are great if
Yes.
they're effective,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Meetings aren't great. And what happens, and this is the same, meetings is the same thing with like little processes that we put in place. It's like you have this reoccurring meeting and it's just on the calendar. So it stays on the calendar for years.
Yep.
And nobody ever says whether it's a good meeting or a bad meeting.
Yep.
People just keep going. And
Yep.
then the other thing that he said to me that I was like, no, well, duh. Like he's like, if the meeting on your calendar says it's for an hour, guess how long it takes? An hour.
Yeah.
It's never short.
100%.
It's never shorter than an hour, right? Like people
Right.
don't like leave a half hour in. I would say very rarely they do. But he's like, so meetings last however long you put them on for,
Yep.
right? So if you want it to be less than an hour, stop, don't put it on for an hour, you
Yep.
know? But so anyways,
There's so
look
many
out for
ways.
that.
So there's so many things like what we're still talking about having more effective meetings and like better communication. Let's talk about the creation of Netflix. And like this is where Jessica, you had tone at the top.
Yeah.
You had sort of like the strategy that was like this is the principles by which we're going to build this company. There are a lot of leaders who said we want to hire the best and pay the best. There are a lot
Yeah.
that is a tried and true formula to state and easy to gravitate to. You can understand how it works. There is there is an ocean in between the statement and the making it happen.
Mm-hmm.
So the making it happen, the
Mm-hmm.
creation of the culture, there are many hard charging earlier stage companies that are trying to do what you were told to do that you actually made happen. So how did you make it happen? How did you not, take what is just statement? How did you actually make it happen? What did you do to make it work?
Well, I'll say less about what I did for a second, but because I think it's a we, because I
Mhm.
wouldn't have been able to make it work on my own. Okay. So culture, if you and I sometimes don't like the word culture because it's just overused, right? It's really, if you want to have operational excellence, right,
Mhm.
which is culture. Culture is
Yep.
how it's how you work, it's how you make
Yep.
decisions, it's how you
Right. Right.
communicate, it's how you get aligned, right? Um, we just worked incredibly hard at it. So we talked equally about how we worked as we did about business, equally, and sometimes more, right?
Yep.
Like because and we were constantly evaluating it, constantly looking at it. Um and we debated it and was like, how do we get it better? How do we not have consensus? How do, so the puzzle was ever changing because, as you know, Lori, like at 200, how you're going to work at 500, how you're going to work at
Oh yeah.
1,000, how you're going to, it's all very different. And so the goalpost was changing. And well, what worked a year ago didn't work now. And how we communicated that then didn't work now. There were things that some of them stood the test of time, right? And then there were things that we just had to rethink. But I think one of the things that I think was unique about Netflix that I don't see at every other organization. Um, and I think you're right, going back to what you said, like there's CEOs, founders, leaders. Philosophically, yes, we want the best talent. Who's not going to say that they won't?
We
Everybody
all
wants.
do.
We
Yep.
want we want transparency. We want feedback. But what happens is nobody does it,
Yep.
right? So you have a bunch of wonderful, well-intended people who philosophically align on values and things like that. But the behavior actually never codifies in the organization because no one, especially at the top, is doing it.
Yep.
Right. So I'll give you like, and one of the secret sauces at Netflix was honestly read, right?
Hmm.
Because we would debate, we would discuss, and we would say, okay, I'm just giving you an example. We we want to get better at feedback.
Yep.
Okay. So we think to get better at feedback, we have to practice it more. And in order to practice it more, we're gonna give it to each other in every meeting. Okay, let's do that. He literally would be the first one to leave the room and go do it.
Yep.
So
Yep.
he would go into his meeting and he would be like, "Hey, Lori, great meeting. Do you have feedback for me? Okay,
Yep.
let me give feedback to you." And
Yep.
he's a very unique individual. He's an engineer and he can input output real easy. He can, and not everybody's like that. But because he did it, guess what? His leaders did it. Their
Yep.
leaders did it. The
Yeah.
people
And
underneath
that's
them did
easier
it.
for you to so like influence, ensure,
Yeah.
follow up on, check, all of
Yeah.
those things that you need to do when you're changing something and
Yeah.
move,
And my
doing
job,
more.
my job was to, I think a lot of CHROs get, well, I want to sound mean, but they, they get confused on what the job is. And, I think a lot of CHROs think about their job as more control. Like, let me control what's happening. Let me put in the right processes. Let me put in the right, things for risk and
Yep,
compliance. And look, you have to be compliant and you don't, you have to make sure everything's buttoned up and people get paid on time and benefits and all these things.
yep,
You have to do that. But I thought about my role not as being the chief human resources officer, because I didn't even really like that term. I thought
yep,
about it as being the chief effectiveness officer. Like my
yep,
job was to point out to the business where we weren't aligned, where we weren't
yep,
moving fast, where we didn't have the best talent, where teams had tension and conflict, and how we were going to sort through that. Because if stuff was slowing us down, we
yep.
weren't going to meet our goals. We weren't going to achieve what we needed to achieve as a business. And so that's where I spent all my time.
Yeah. Well, that's actually one thing I wanted to talk to you about is like sort of like the state of sort of the role of the chief human resources officer. It's my view, and again, I'm in a company where like that is a primary customer of what my company offers in the spaces of benefits.
Right.
And what I see, it reminds me of the time when I worked in electronic health records. And back in the day, the people who were the chief information officer, they were people who were like in basements, in windowless offices with lots of cables around them. It was a different type of job.
Yeah.
What I see in companies is that the CHROs or the chief people officers, we're moving from a time in companies where that responsibility, which was largely hiring, talent management from a do we have the right people in the right seats, how we calibrate, how we do promotions and culture. Do we
Right.
have affinity groups, inclusivity, like which is
Yeah.
important stuff.
Right.
But what I am seeing, and tell me what you think about this, what I am seeing is the level of complex management, the people who are really sitting at the strategy table. So you had that for Netflix, where
Yeah.
where talent was like core to the strategy, like really core to the strategy.
Yeah.
That is not always the case, but today that is more the case. The other thing that I'm saying is that the risk for most employers is higher than ever. Brand risk, a brand risk, employees suing or, like walking out, like all of those kinds of things. 5 generations in a workforce at any particular workplace, issues of coming back, whatever. So what I'm seeing for that role, that CHRO role, that is now more at the leadership table, boardroom
Mm-hmm.
than ever before, a dramatic shift. And so I'm stating all that. That's my observation over the past year. You tell me.
Yeah, no, I mean it absolutely is. And I think the thing that's happened over time with this function is that it's just gotten more and more complex,
Yeah,
right? And now you not only are sort of this HR person who, sort of puts in the programs to hire the best talent and things like that. You're also the chief diversity officer. You're also
yep,
the chief medical officer. You're now also the COO in many kind of ways.
yep,
And so I think in some ways, some companies and some of the functions have caught up to that, but some haven't.
yep.
And so that's just been sort of and it's a hard shift um for a lot because you're sort of you're asking these functions that have been traditionally more administrative than strategic to now be the strategic partner who's going to navigate how we're going to solve remote work and hybrid
Or
work
AI
and
risk.
AI.
AI risk
Yes.
is rolling up into the
Yes.
CHROs, like at
Yes.
most companies now. It's like,
Yes.
wow, that's
Yes.
incredible.
Which is incredible. And I so there are some amazing talented CHROs out there that are doing amazing things. Like I think about Donna Morris at Walmart. She's incredible. And there's many more, but there is a lag sort of in the system, right? For folks being able to keep up with all the things that have just landed in this world over the last few years. Not a lot of people are prepared. And then some people can't flex to that, right? Which is okay too. So, and then some companies, like I think what the other thing about this job that could be a bit challenging is some companies say they want all these things, but
Right.
they don't really. And
Yeah.
so you have these well-meaning groups trying to like, make a difference, but they're like, yeah,
Or they
just,
don't have the resources.
right.
These things, they do require resources, investment,
Yeah,
and everything else. And that's another, sort of, I would say, hat of the people leaders, which is like the financial acumen that is required to understand how all of this adds up to the financial outcomes for a company.
exactly.
That is a level of just skill set that wasn't,
Yes.
I would just say, there as primary 15 years ago.
Yeah, and I was just talking about this the other day with a good friend of mine, Anish Batlaw. He works at General Atlantic. He's amazing. But anyways, he advises General Atlantic is a big, investment firm, PE firm, and they invest in tons of
I'm
companies.
aware. Thank you,
Yes.
Jessica.
I
Thank
was
you.
just telling it for the listeners who don't know. But he anyways, he has all this data on what makes companies successful and what doesn't, just because of all the pattern recognition that he's had over time of their investments. And, you know, I often get asked, and he often gets asked, what should be the metric for HR? And if
Mhm.
you ask a lot of HR leaders, they're going to tell you retention. And that's just wrong. It's not
Yep.
retention. If, if you're retaining all the right people,
Yep. Yep.
maybe.
Yep.
But if you're retaining all the wrong people, it's the absolute wrong metric. And that does nothing for the bottom line. If you have talent density, right? Especially in the roles that matter most, and this doesn't have to do with just a title. It's the roles that create the most value creation for the company. If you have talent density in those roles, it directly impacts the bottom line. And you can tie your work to that. But
Huh.
again, there's just like sort of this old school playbook still going around. It's like, and there was this sort of evolution in the function of like, let's make everybody happy, which I'm like, can we? No, we're never going to make it. We're never going to make anybody happy, and especially not everybody. And so there's always going to be somebody upset. The job is, again, effectiveness in making the business successful. And the biggest thing you can do to make a business successful is to guarantee that you have the best talent in the most crucial roles.
Yep. Okay, so Jessica, you are in venture, you're an advisor, you're a partner. So business is a core competency of how you think and how you show up. And so that you also know is not necessarily like the highest honed skill in the world of chief people officers, leaders, etc. So as you go out and advise and you are very interested in changing like how work is done today for better effectiveness for businesses, what are the top things that you're talking to people about? Give me like two or three that you're just like, you might be thinking about this. So you just gave us one, in terms of talent density. Give us a couple more of those like big
You
tips.
know, the biggest one,
No.
clarity.
Okay.
People don't know what's going on. They're working in vacuums. And if you go down a couple layers in the organization and you ask, like, what are the top three priorities for the business? People don't know,
Yep.
right? And in a McKinsey study, it says only 42% of employees say their leaders provide them with clear direction and context to make decisions effectively. So that means over half of teams are operating in ambiguity. Like,
Yep.
I
Yep.
mean, and it's not surprising, but it's like these are the things that slow people down. And I, I think one of the things that we did do well at Netflix was context,
Yep.
context with everything. That's how we avoided the control, right? So it was, our philosophy on that was context, not control,
Yep.
right? So the
Yep.
job of a leader was to give context. And if you didn't give the right context and your team wasn't doing well, guess whose fault it was? Yours. I remember having this conversation with Reed one time, way, way, way back in the day. And I was like, my team, like, they're just not doing what they need to be doing. And like, oh my God. And he was like, well, you know whose fault that is? And I was like, yeah, theirs, duh. And he's like, no, it's yours.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, it's not. And he's like,
Yeah.
no, it is.
I'm
It's
fantastic.
Yeah, I'm great, Reed. And he was like, no, it's yours because you failed to set the proper context for them to be successful. And I just don't think enough companies and enough leaders think about that. And it's the trickle down of information that just needs to happen. And when people don't understand what they need to do to be
Yep.
successful, you got a big problem on your hands. And I think that that is plaguing a bunch of companies.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I like particularly in this time where we have a lot of things going on. So, I think about the things of like, everyone was very excited in a important way, my view around DEI and being purposeful in bringing that into the workplace in a way
Yeah.
that everybody had a way to show up and everything. And now that has become a politically charged thing. So what do you do with that? You have a whole bunch of team members who are feeling inclusive, now perhaps feeling excluded. So that's going to create problems. You've got, again, this 5 generations of employees who are in the workplace, many of whom are being forced to come back to work. For some, that's like, okay, here we go again. This is just like a routine that I know. For others, it is an insult that
Yeah.
you're asking me to do this outrageous thing and like pay for gas or
Yeah. Yeah. God
transportation
forbid.
or
Yeah.
things like that. You've
Uh,
got people aging out. You've got all these complexities. So in this sort of like morass of complexity, so we've got clarity. We've got how we measure success, and it's not retention. What are like the top issues in the chaos sort of the workplace that are either opportunities for the future or the things like you've really got to be focused on addressing right now, just when you go out there talking to so many?
yeah. The world in which we work now is a different world.
Hmm.
Um, there's all these things happening in the ethos of wherever you live, whether you're in the
Hmm.
United States, you're in Brazil, you're in Germany, you're in France, it doesn't matter. There's all these things happening, and there's a lot of anxiety and things happening. Um, But what I think companies should try to focus on is what is going to make their people and their business the most successful, right?
Hmm.
So Patty and I did, DEI, as you mentioned, has sort of become this like politicized word,
Which
which
is
makes
crazy, but
makes no
there
sense
it
to
there it
me.
is. There it
There it
is.
is, fine. But we did a whole episode on it the other day where we just talked to each other as, kind of CHROs, like, about
Yeah.
this. And we sort of went through the history, and it's like companies get that diverse workforces are good for business. They
Yes.
do. Like,
Yep.
and this work has been happening for decades,
Yep.
and progress has been made,
Yep.
right? You and I can say that because we're women executives. We might not
Yep.
have been had progress not been made.
Yep.
Um, and the workforce looks a lot different than it did 30 years ago, looks different than it did even 10 years ago. So
Yep.
progress will be keep getting made, right? Um, and great companies get that, right? And it's good for business. So it's not going away. And the other thing that companies have to figure out is if you're going to have um, a really incredible workforce that is representative of your customer, which, if you're a global company, that's
Yep.
global customer.
Yep.
Um, That will be great for business. And also, you have to build an environment where these folks can thrive, where they can see themselves, where they can do the best work of their lives. And so I think that that should be the focus and try to hush out the noise. It's very hard not to. And then I think companies, going back to clarity, I think what's happened also over the past few years is that, it's really hard to hire people. And so the pendulum in terms of like all the things you were going to get if you
Yeah.
were, we'll give you a massage,
Yeah.
we'll, do your laundry, like, you have to start being really clear about what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. And let's talk about retention for a second. Employees don't leave because you didn't do their laundry or you didn't, give them like a budget for, buying a lesson on LinkedIn or whatever. They leave
I
because
would have left for that. Okay, I've never had those perks, but anyway, go ahead.
yeah. But they leave because they don't have a good boss,
Yeah, yeah,
right? They aren't working on something that they feel they're passionate about, and
right.
they don't think that they're paid well.
Yep,
People stay for bosses, right?
yep,
And they stay, even if they're not paid the best, but they think they're paid fairly and they love it, they stay,
yep,
right?
yep.
So it's the environment.
Yeah. That is and I've just seen that so many times, like so many times. And that, like you have this just incredible talent, they're not challenged enough,
Right.
and it's just like there's just like so many different, and then you recognize it too late, and then it's like, oh well, we can, and like that's like happens so many times. And then I've seen, just also, and some of like, for me as a professional, some of the proudest moments I have as a leader is recognizing somebody who is doing something of value, but then elevating them to like the hot project, the thing that's really hard, and just boom, seeing something unlock in a way that is like surprising you. I always, learn something because these are always people who have different talents than I do that you can learn a lot from. And that, generally, mostly, people who are much younger than I am are the ones who are teaching me the most at this stage for
Yeah.
me. So, okay,
Yeah.
just I want to close out on TruthWorks.
Okay.
And you've been doing this with Patty for a while. The two of you are
A year
powerhouse. So,
now. A year
yeah,
now.
right.
Yeah.
So like you've been doing it every week. You've been having powerhouse conversations. Like all the lessons that people are talking about on your podcast. So why are you doing it? What are you learning?
Oh my God. I learned so much from each guest, like,
Well, let's talk about what TruthWorks is. Let's talk about what
okay.
TruthWorks
So
is.
Truth Works is a podcast that Patty McCord, who was the original CHRO of Netflix, she and I started because one, we love each other and we wanted to like hang out together again. And the other thing is like we are just so curious about work and how to make work better. And nobody tells you the truth about how work really works. And so we were like, let's just tell the truth about like how compensation works. Let's tell the truth about how promotions really happen. And so much more. And when we've had people on the show from like a neurologist to lots of like organizational behavioralists to CEOs and founders. And it is just fascinating. And I would say every time we learn something, we had this gentleman on yesterday we recorded with, it'll be out in a couple of weeks. His name is Karthik Ramanan, and he's from Oxford, professor, but he's an organizational behavioralist psychologist. And he wrote this book on leading in the age of outrage, which is kind
Yep.
of, a little bit of what we were just talking about.
Yeah.
And what you can do as a leader. And, these were things that I, struggled with at Netflix in terms of, how do we handle a crisis in Brazil? How do we handle a crisis in the US? And, as a leadership team, we debated, do we Do we talk about these things? Do we not talk about these things? How do we, if we are going to talk about them, who's going to talk about them? How are we going to talk about them? How are, and then there's also just sort of the demand and pressure from employees to respond, to do something.
Yep.
And so he just gave, tons of advice and lessons on that. And so every episode I walk away learning, I walk away energized, and I hope that, we're giving people some really good information to go off and do good stuff with.
Yep.
That's the
Yep.
goal.
Yep. Well, it's fun to listen to. That is
Thank you.
for sure.
So is yours.
It's very clear that, thank you. It's very clear that you and Patty do have this like great rapport, enormous respect for each other. And clearly, like the time you worked together, that must have been a very, very fun time to build and create. And you can see a lot of that idea flow, permeate into your discussions as you're like, wait, I have a comment about that. Well, I have a comment about that.
I know we go a little nuts, but both of us are just like, I would say like one of the common things that we have is we are just so curious. Like,
Yep.
and we just get so excited about things that like we don't understand completely. Like, oh my gosh, tell us more. We want to know everything. So it's been just a fun thing to do. So I hope people are enjoying it.
Yep. Well, let's close out today on Inspiring Women, and we wanted to have Patty with us, and
I know,
she's not here. So
Patty, I will say one one of the things about Patty, which I've told her throughout our career journeys with each other, she's not good at the details. So she probably like is with her grandkid, not looking at her phone, and
it's okay. It's okay.
And yeah,
We'll close out this Inspiring Women interview. And what we're going to do is you can channel Patty and you can channel Patty's best advice for other aspiring women. So let's inspire them. What would Patty say to them?
What would Patty say? Patty would say, just do it. Don't let the fear get in your way. Just go for it. And I think I would say something very similar. So, I think fear just holds us back, right? And it helped, I personally, sort of set back a little bit sometimes because I was, I'm a woman and we're sort of raised to do that. But also like I would call my parents for like, I'd be like, I think I'm going to ask for a raise. And like, don't you dare. Just put your head down and do great work. And like, I was like, okay. And so I did that. And I was lucky because things came my way and people recognized that. But I didn't advocate for myself really ever. And so I really wish I would have, right? And I think if you sit in the fear, it just overtakes you. And when you really think about it, the only bad thing that can happen is a no. But you didn't have it before the no anyways, right? And at some point, someone will say yes, So I think don't hold back. Go get what you want and know you're worth it.
That is awesome. It's a great way to close out. I've been speaking with Jessica Neal on Inspiring Women. Jessica, thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, thank you. It was so much fun. Highlight of my day. And we'll do another swap.
We'll keep it going. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Bye-bye. You. All right. Bye.
This has been an episode of Inspiring Women with Lori McGraw. Please subscribe, rate, and review. We are produced at Executive Podcast Solutions. More episodes can be found on inspiringwomen.show. I am Lori McGraw, and thank you for listening.